Amen. 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 Well, welcome everybody to the living room here. There's a little living room set, and we're so glad to have you here with us at Promised Land. If you're new to our area, we're so glad to have you. I was just met a couple this past Sunday. Their first time to physically be in the building, but they had been watching us online for the last couple of months, and they finally got to meet us in person. And I said, man, if you made it through 2 months of online church, then there's a chance you're going to like us in person. Because online church is tough. It's tough to do. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us. We have many people joining us, not just in our area, but across the United States and other parts of the world. Tonight, we want to have a discussion. We want to have a talk, and I am troubled deeply by all of the things that are happening in our country. And I am like you, that I want to do something, I don't know what to do. And there's just so many things pressing in on us when we watch the national news. Is so overwhelming. And we had just come out of 2 months of we're all going to die of the coronavirus every time we turn on the television. And as that's kind of getting a little better, bam, we're getting hit with this horrible situation in Minnesota. And so when we watch everything that's going on across the United States, it's very troubling. So I wanted to have a discussion. I want to have a discussion here in San Marcos, and I wanted to have a diverse panel. And I think it's just an absolute blessing that when I wanted to have a diverse panel, I just texted a few of my friends, and I said, would you join me? And all three of you immediately said, yes, I would love to be a part of it. So thank you so much for saying yes. I want to introduce each one of them. Right here beside me is Ms. Jonnie Wilson. And it's going to be hard to talk about you without crying, but we go back 17 years now.
Yes.
It was exactly 17 years this week.
Has it been?
Is this week
Wow.
that I walked into your office and said, we're looking for some space to have church. And we want to know if you can help us find some space at Texas State. You were working in the Multicultural Student Affairs office, I think, at that time. And you helped us get into Alkek Library, and the rest is history. Here we are today, and you've just been, from that day, you jumped in and got involved with us at Promised Land. And so currently, Jonnie is a career counselor at Texas State University, and she served many, many years in the other office of Multicultural Student Affairs. Mm-hmm. Do you have 3 master's degrees?
I have 2.
You have 2 master's degrees, and now you have a counseling degree.
Right. I'm a licensed professional counselor.
Licensed professional counselor. Okay, incredible.
Practice.
You're also an amazing mom. You have 3 beautiful girls. You have many grandkids. In fact, I remember holding your grandson one of our first services, and now he's
17.
A huge high schooler.
6'4".
6'4".
Yeah.
Amazing. So you're just an inspiration. I could go on and on about Jonnie, but we got to talk about these guys over here too. All right. So over here is this is Tom Guyton, and Tom is an amazing man. He grew up in our area. And he is currently the director of bands at Del Valley High School. He is also serving on the school board of Lockhart ISD. And he's the pastor of Promised Land Lockhart. How do you do all that stuff? That's what I want to know. Oh, man. So just an incredible man of integrity, just a great friend. Thank you for being a part of our family. Thank you. And it's great. You have beautiful girls as well, beautiful wife, and you're doing great things.
Well, thank you.
and Lockhart.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Pastor.
Over here on the other side is Mr. Bob Klett. He is chief of police in San Marcos, Texas. He is one of the nicest men that you'll ever meet. I believe we met almost 3 years ago. I can't remember the date, but I think it was right after Officer Copeland was shot and our lives intersected. And I'm so thankful that they did. And you and your beautiful wife, Tammy, joined up with Promised Land at that point. And you've just been a joy to have in our family. And since then, you have been moved from assistant police chief to interim police chief. And if I have any vote, which I don't, but you'll be police chief official. All of you San Marcos people out there. So what I want to do is hear stories. I have a really good friend. I was on the phone with him for a long time Saturday night, FaceTiming. He lives in New York. His name is Wayne Francis. He's a pastor. He's a black pastor that his family's from Jamaica. Just an incredible man. And I said, Wayne, how do you, he's lived all over the United States all his life, in different states. And I said, what do you think would be something good that would come out of this discussion? And he said that he feels like we really just need to intertwine our stories. That if we could intertwine our stories and really get to know one another, that lives are going to be changed. And so what I'm hoping out of this discussion is not that people will watch us and go, wow, look what they said, my life has changed. I think probably what would be better is if they looked at us talking and said, that's how we do it. That's how we can talk about things and love one another, respect one another, ask questions that may be tough or whatever, but just model that. So that's the goal, and I don't expect for us to speak for your whole race or your gender or your profession or anything like that. We're just going to talk about our life. So I'd like to start with you, Tom, and I'd love for you to tell us just what it's been like to grow up, in this area as a black man, black boy, black teenager, go to school, get a job, get married, have kids, be a father. I'd love to just hear your perspective on that. And so you guys, whenever it's your turn, just go for it. You could be a radio DJ, so okay. I'm not worried about you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Pastor Robin, for this opportunity to come and for us to have this conversation. I do appreciate it. My life, I'm sure, has paralleled most folks' life. It's been filled with ups and downs, good days and bad days. I grew up in Lockhart, was born and raised there, went through the school system there, and then, decided that would be my home. And I have had those instances, I call it where you're kind of reminded maybe that you're of a different persuasion than other people. And it's not that it's always been an overt reminder. Sometimes it's covert reminder. And I don't think sometimes people even know what they're doing. One of the things that always stuck out for me growing up is that when I would talk to people, I would always get this one comment. I would have a conversation going on, and somebody would often say, "You speak so well." For so long, I took that as a compliment. And then as I began to grow and mature, and I would hear that, "Well, you speak so well." And I began to think, well, how would you expect me to speak?
Yeah.
I've gone to school here. I've been taught proper grammar and syntax and all of that. So This is how I'm supposed to speak. So it was those little things that really began to stick with me and things like that.
And so just to be clear, you're saying that what they're saying is for a black person.
Yes, there was even a time I was told when I met someone, I had talked to them on the phone previously before I met them, and then when I met them, the lady, she said, I just have something funny I have to tell you. I said, what is it? She said, on the phone I thought you were a white man. I said, no, I happen to be a black man.
Wow.
So it's been things such as that where, and sometimes people are just not aware. Sometimes that comes from, and I think that's where a lot of this comes from. It comes from ignorance, not being aware sometimes of what we say, or being aware enough of other cultures to know that we're basically all the same. I mean, we're being taught the same things. We all have the same up and downs in lives that we go through. So, to hear someone say, oh, you speak so well, you're so intelligent, things like that. And as I got older, it really began to bother me. And I'm sure there were a few times that I had a few smart remarks.
Did you?
So on and so forth, yeah. So,
what was it like in Lockhart? Very small town, very, very small town, rural Texas. Was there a lot of things happening on in Lockhart that may be different from other towns that you've been in Austin, Del Valle, San Marcos, wherever else where did you go to college?
At UT.
Okay.
So it was in Austin. Oddly enough, for as large as Austin is, I think I felt the most, and I don't want to use the word racist. I think sometimes it's overused, but I think I felt the most prejudiced when I was in Austin at UT, rather than in a small town in Texas, which I know that sometimes gets the reputation of where it comes from. I think when I was in Austin, I saw it more there than when I did in Lockhart. As a matter of fact, my wife and I, we've had discussions quite often. When we're together in Austin, I think we get more stares there because we're a mixed couple than in Lockhart.
Wow.
And we sometimes think of Austin as being more progressive.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've necessarily found that to be the case so much. In Lockhart, growing up as a small town, it was small. Basically, we all knew each other. It was somewhat segregated, when I was growing up. People of color usually lived on the east side of town. The white community was focused mostly on the west side of town. That has changed a lot now. You see a lot of the neighborhoods now are a lot more diverse. But growing up as a kid, that was the case. And I was thinking about it from a school setting. I never really experienced that from teachers or anything like that. I was blessed to really have some great teachers, and they were predominantly white teachers. I had teachers who really poured a lot into me. There was one teacher I had my freshman year, my freshman English teacher, who talked a lot about what literature she wanted me to read as an up-and-coming young black man, who just gave me a lot of good things to think about and read and consider. So from that perspective, I did not experience it. It was really when I got to college that first year, and you have to keep in mind when I went to UT the first year, it was the big movement in South Africa was occurring at that time, and individuals had built the actual shanties on the UT campus, and so I experienced those being torn down and burned and things like that. And there was a lot of staring and things, and there were times when I felt like, because I would sometimes come home to Lockhart on the weekends and then go back late Sunday night back to my dorm, when I did feel afraid, walking from my car, because I had to park quite a ways back to my dorm room. So I was able to really kind of experience it from that particular realm. And as I was telling my wife the other day, what I did was I fixed in my mind how I would respond whenever I was faced with a situation where I was uncomfortable or, a period of racism. And I still use it to this day. We were talking on the ride over, and I told her about, I was stopped in Austin last year by 2 police officers. And she said, you've been stopped more than that. You were stopped twice, just, So the last couple of years, I've been stopped about 3 times. But what I always do, because of the tenor of the times right now, is I speak very slowly, very methodically when I'm pulled over. I establish direct eye contact. I feel like I should be the one to keep the situation low and make sure that it doesn't escalate. And that's just a tactic that I use.
Now, were you taught that, or is that just something that
that's just something that I've picked up on my own.
I want to ask you, you've told me before about your generations of your family grew up in Lockhart and worked in the fields and did things like, and that's just an incredible story to me. Did your parents teach you how to be black, how to interact. I've heard other people talk like that, or when you raise you have one daughter that's older, an adult, right? And so I'm just wondering what kind of conversations happen. I sound really ignorant right now.
No.
I am ignorant. I want to learn, though. I want to know about that. What kind of conversations you have?
My mother experienced segregation in Lockhart. Her class was the class that integrated Lockhart High School. She went up until the 11th grade to the all-black high school there in Lockhart that's still there. It's not used anymore, but the building still stands. She integrated, her class was the first class to integrate Lockhart High School in 1965. So she told us of her story that first day, the fear that she felt going to school. And she was also told when she got there that first day that she would not be a senior. She would have to go back a year because she had not been taught the same things as the other kids, although they were being told that they were getting the same information. So she told us the story of when her mother and father went to the school and said, no, she's a senior.
Okay.
And she's going to finish her senior year here. So she implanted in us the importance of education, my brother, my sister, and I, and how we would have to be willing to stand and be able to speak up for ourselves and be able to speak out. And she taught us that you don't do it from a place of anger, but you do it from a place of intelligence. We were often taught that, a person who does things out of anger, then people will discredit and discount you and just say you're angry. And so I internalized that, and that's where I came up with the idea that, when I do have those interactions, I'm going to make sure that I'm speaking from this place of being calm so that I can make sure that this situation doesn't escalate. And the more I thought about that, I thought it's somewhat tragic that I have to think like that and I have to have this script in my mind and ready to play out. But those are kind of the times that we live in. And just like you said, the chief here, there are a lot of excellent policemen. I consider myself friends with a lot, and particularly a lot of the policemen.
Now, your bio said something about, I read your bio on Del Valley website. It said something that you hadn't been involved with. Was it law enforcement or
I worked in corrections
in
the prison system there in Lockhart.
Okay, gotcha.
And there are a lot of great people that do it. But just in case, I've always believed that I run across that individual who is not that upstanding police officer, I need to be ready. Because the other thing that plays through my mind often also is when I come home from games or contests, it's usually 1:30, 2:30 in the morning. When I'm just traveling home at a normal time after school, there's a back way that I take, gets me home a little bit faster.
Yeah.
On those nights that I'm traveling home late, I make sure that I take the major highway in, 183 in, I go down San Antonio Street, because just in case I'm pulled over, I want it to be done where there's possibly some other traffic. I'm out, in the street lights and things like that. And, as I thought about, that's something else that I have to,
I would never think
be
that.
aware of. But that's something that I'm aware of, and I have to think about it. Yeah.
Think about that from a race perspective, so incredible. I have a follow-up question, but I want to save it for a minute. Ms. Jonnie.
Yeah, I was listening to your story, and I lived in Lockhart too, and I had a totally different experience. And I think it's because I was not from Lockhart.
Oh.
See, I was kind of planted there when my husband left me. I'm originally from everywhere because I'm a military brat.
Oh.
I lived in San Diego, California. I lived in Long Beach, California. I was born in Virginia. So I lived in different places, and I lived in public housing with my 3 daughters. So there's a stigma that goes along with that. So I was treated quite differently, and people made a lot of assumptions about me and my children. So what I have found in Lockhart, when we lived in Lockhart, if you're not from there, you are treated differently. And so the experiences that you had as far as teachers, my children did not experience that at all.
Give us some examples.
because we lived in the projects, one day my daughter, I gave my daughter some money, and she went to school with it, and she was accused by the teacher that she stole money.
Oh.
And so I had to go up there and say, no, she didn't steal this money. I gave her that money. But it was an assumption
Yeah.
that because we lived in public housing, that, you know, we didn't have money. And then one of my daughters, she was getting ready to go, she was supposed to go in the first grade. They wanted to hold her back and put her in special education. And instead of having an ARD meeting, they went to my house and wanted me to sign the papers there instead of having the ARD meeting. And I know at that particular time I had just started attending college and at Texas State, but I was still living in Lockhart. And I said, no, I know the procedures, I know what I need to do, and no, I'm not going to sign these papers. But they made the assumptions I lived in the project, I'm a welfare mother, and I'm just going to sign the papers. And I remember her teacher telling me, well, you know that sometimes they have to have quotas of certain kids to be in special ed in order to get funding. And that put a fire under me that the whole time my children were in school, whether they were in Lockhart or in San Marcos, to ensure that they had the proper education, I was always up at the school.
Yeah.
While I was going to school.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to make sure that they were treated fairly. Sometimes I would just go and sit in the back of the classroom to make sure that my child was being treated fairly.
So you went to Southwest Texas State University, and then you went to Missouri to get your first master's degree. Is that right?
Master's, yes.
And tell us about what was it like in Missouri? Was it different than here?
Yeah, it was more racist there.
Really?
It was. When I was there, I was going to school there. I remember the KKK marched on campus.
Oh my!
In all their garb.
And this was like the 90s?
It was the 90s.
Wow.
I was ready to go home.
Absolutely.
I remember that some of my classmates would tell me, well, you know, the only reason why you're here is because of affirmative action. I said that to my face. Because I had gotten a Thurgood Marshall Fellowship.
Yeah.
Which paid for my tuition, paid for everything. So I would tell them, I said, yeah, maybe I did get here for affirmative action. But getting these straight A's, that's not coming from affirmative action, you know. Yeah. So I must, it was as if I didn't belong there.
Those friends were white friends?
Yes.
Brown, black,
White,
what were they? Okay.
White. Yeah.
Now, how do you, I have so many questions. So when they say things like that, and this kind of is related to what you're talking about with when people say things that are just ignorant, do you feel, do you engage with that, or do you just kind of laugh it off and keep going, or?
To me, it's their ignorance, and I don't engage in it. And there's many stories that I feel as a black woman, being black, being a woman of color, and being educated, I always feel like I have to be in spaces where I have to feel like I have to prove myself that I need to be there.
Yeah.
I'll give you a good example. I went to Texas State, to the HR department to check on some information. I was dressed nicely. And the lady behind the counter asked me, and I was at that time the assistant director for student diversity and inclusion. And the lady asked me, "Are you a custodian?"
Oh.
And I said, "No, I'm the assistant director for student diversity and inclusion."
Wow.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter how I'm dressed. It doesn't matter what kind of degrees I have. People are going to question me.
Yeah. You told me something about in the grocery store. You've had people do things.
Yeah, yes, all the time. You know, I've been followed. You know, it doesn't matter, you know, where I go or what I do. You know, it's always that question of who are you, what are you up to? And I always say this, you know, when people ask me about race, is that I wear this all the time. It's not like I can take it off. So I'm always reminded of who I am when I walk out the door. My safe haven is my house.
Yeah.
You know, that's why I'm so protective of my house. You know, that's my safe haven. So I'm always hyper vigilant when I walk out the door because I don't know what I'm going to feel or what somebody's going to say. But I was taught to love. My mother taught us that because I was raised around all different cultures, you know. And my mother I didn't even know what the N-word was growing up.
Wow.
Until somebody pointed it out to me. And then I had to ask my mom, what does that mean? I didn't even understand.
Yeah.
Because we didn't use that word. So my mother always told us to love, regardless of who that person was. And because we were raised around so many different cultures, and coming to Texas was a culture shock to me, because that's when I experienced somebody calling me out of my name, you know, for the first time, you know. And living in California, you would think I would, you know, because I lived in the 60s in California, when they were rioting and things like that.
Oh, wow.
But I didn't experience it till I came to Texas. And that's when people started questioning who I was, and I started questioning my identity. And I started looking at my skin color and saying, okay, so something is wrong with this color? You know, and that was around 13 when I started really questioning and trying to understand, and that's why I ended up with degrees in history.
Oh, wow.
Because of trying to understand and figure out where the origin of where all of this came from. Where is all of this difference come from? Because I feel like we lose the part of who we are when we separate and segregate from each other. We do. Because when we can love each other and understand each other, I think that we're better off. But when we're segregating ourselves and not understanding each other, you would lose. We all lose.
Well, you've told me before that you chose to really kind of break out of a church that was more predominantly black and come to Promised Land.
Yes.
Just to sort of break out of that mold.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and even because I was raised in a predominantly black church, although my mother has always allowed us, you know, we always, you know, were around different cultures. And then when we did volunteer work, we would go to nunneries, and, you know,
oh, really?
I mean, we just always did that. But as I grew up, you know, I was working at a multicultural, you know, place, you know. So to me, it was infiltrated everything in my life. So it's really important to me that where I worship, it was the same way. Because that's what heaven looks like.
Yep. Well, thank you for sharing that. Let's ask Mr. Klett. Tell us about your journey. Tell us about why you got into law enforcement, what it was that inspired you and kind of got you on the path that you're on today.
Sure. So much like you, I was an Air Force brat. My dad was a fighter pilot, so grew up all over Texas, New Mexico, California, Florida, Germany, Holland, Germany. So many different cultures. Dad retired back to Fredericksburg in 1984, and so went there to finish out high school. and then came here to go to Texas or Southwest Texas State University in 1986, and been here ever since. And I wanted to follow his footsteps, but these glasses happened, and the Air Force wasn't very accepting of people with glasses. So I wanted to do the next best thing of serving people. My senior year in high school, I got involved in EMS back home, got me involved in the fire department. And so I came here to go to school, got involved in the fire department here. That got me a connection into dispatching as a student dispatcher at the University Police Department. And I did that for several years before I was old enough to become an officer. And just being around that service attitude, helping others was really important to me. And again, I think more of my love was in the fire department, but the police officer thing came open when I was of age, and they took me and put me through the academy. And when I was doing my work, I realized that the San Marcos officers looked like they had a lot more fun than we were having. And so as soon as I could, I went over to San Marcos Police Department temporarily until Austin Fire Department would take me. And 30 years later, I'm the top cop in San Marcos. And I look back and, how did this happen? But you find yourself in a community that you love working in.
Yeah.
And for the first half of my career was working nights because I loved watching the sun go down, the tempo of calls, seeing how the city changed from a daytime city to a nighttime city. And then before you went home, watching the sun come back up again. And to me, that was intriguing, watching how people would change through that whole time. And then just growing up in this agency and having the wonderful support of the community that we have, it makes it a great place to work. Being in a department that valued having good people really kind of formed my leadership coming up, the leadership around me. And I think over the last 10 or so years, as I get into that kind of leadership role and in that hiring role, it becomes very important that we hire based on character. Because the people that you work with, the people that go out into the community and do the job, have to be able to fit the community they serve. San Marcos is a very diverse community. We've got the college, we've got very low income people, we've got, just everything under the sun. We're right between Austin and San Antonio.
Yeah.
So we've got a mixture of that all, and a police department is really a reflection of the community it serves. It should be. So we're different than New Braunfels, we're different than Kyle, Buda, thankfully different than a lot of other departments. And that's very intentional. Because you set a culture and you set a guideline for what you're going to hire. And this last year we talked about when you set your goals for where you want to be in life, what you want to be like, do you want to set it for what's going on in mainstream media, or do you want to set it for a higher goal? And that really spoke to me a lot because it's really a lot of what we were trying to do at the police department in enabling people to make good decisions, to have the right mindset to do the job. And, certainly over the years, people have gotten through the cracks. I was telling Tom before we started, several years ago, one of those guys got through the cracks. And as he got out of the training program, some of the other officers started to realize that he had some very racist tendencies. And it was those officers who didn't stand for that and turned him in, and he's gone. And it saddens me that happened, but I'm proud of the officers who said, you know what, this can't stand in our ranks.
Wow.
And you hear so much about the thin blue line, but that thin blue line is also making sure that who you're working with are good people.
Well, let me ask you this. San Marcos has gone through some of the most difficult scenarios for a police officer in the last 3 years. We just mentioned Officer Copeland, who was shot and killed in the line of duty several years ago. And then just a month or two ago, we had another horribly violent situation where 3 officers were shot, 1 lost his life. I don't remember the last time, I watch the news a lot. I don't remember the last time I saw that 3 officers were shot in Austin or San Antonio. For a little town, that's a lot. That's a very tragic. What's it like for your officers to go back? They had to go back the next day. They had to go back on their shift. What was that like?
It's very damaging. You know, after Ken happened, you realize a lot of the hurt that comes in, not only with the officers, but with the families too, because there's that thought that we work in a small town and that bad things don't happen here, and then Ken gets shot and killed. And you go, okay, that is the worst thing that's going to ever happen in your professional career to your buddies, to your family, to your community. And you think, okay, statistically, this can never happen again.
Yeah, we're past that.
We're good. We can go a whole nother lifetime and not have to worry about this now. And then a year ago, Claudia gets hit up on the interstate and loses a leg like that. And then, you know, you come around like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. And it's that same thing. Okay, we're a small department. Statistically, this cannot happen again. And Paul Beller gets hit up on the interstate, and he's still in the hospital, and you've got that going on. And then
those were where they pulled somebody over and somebody
those
hit them,
were things where on Claudia's thing it was a dark night, and there was a barbecue pit that had fallen out of a vehicle onto the interstate lanes, and she gets up there, and cars are, you know, trying not to dodge it. So we do what we do. He's trying to keep people safe. Let me get this out of the roadway, and a car just
hit her.
Didn't move over, didn't see her, and hit her. Same thing with Paul. Some wood in the roadway. He did some maneuvers to get all the traffic slowed down and stopped, and he gets out of his vehicle to get this removed, and the driver came up and didn't know why the traffic was stopping, and swerved around and somehow hit Paul and did that. And then within weeks, you have that, like you said, that nightmare call where you know, one is killed and two are seriously injured, and you're just like, my gosh, how much more can go on? And as we talked through all that after those three, you know, as horrible as it is, I think the officers are starting to get to that mindset now where you realize that, you know what, it's now not a factor of it's not going to happen again, but it's like the next minute it can happen again. You start to change your mindset about, I mean, you're always cautious. You train about being safe and keeping yourself safe and everybody else safe around you. But these things are just so sudden when they happen, and it's just, it's incredible. And to be the chief when all this is going on, I mean, this is not about me at this point. It's about my people and my community and making sure that they're good, because we still have to come out and work. And luckily, after this last shooting incident, we had help coming in again. Buda, Kyle, New Braunfels, Hays County, they all came and helped run shifts in our city so that officers could have some downtime. We could, you know, honor our injured and our dead. And man, so many prayers answered with Justin Mueller and Franco Stewart and their healing. So many prayers answered, and that probably we were pretty close to having another officer shot at that same call, and that he didn't get shot. The fact that Franco and Justin are still alive are just major blessings.
So when things like that happen, or things like what has happened in Minnesota, which I want to just clearly say that what happened to George Floyd was evil and horrible and wrong. How do police departments respond to things? Like, is there other training that happens, or are you training to deal with those things already? Is there training about dealing with race? Kind of give us a picture on what that looks like.
So overall in Texas, there's requirements of dealing with, talking about race, talking about de-escalation. We're working on a process. There's a process in Texas where you become a recognized agency, where you adopt your policies to best practices across Texas. There's a national standard too, but that's a lot more detailed. And so Texas Police Chiefs Association came up with some model policies. And we've, over the last several years, been looking at those policies, and you look at what makes sense for San Marcos out of those policies. There are some that are absolutes. These are things you cannot do in those policies that you have to have in your policies. but then there's other ones that we adapt. So we're always looking at our policy. We're looking at what's changing on the legal standards. We're looking at what's changing in what our community wants. And then certainly when things like this happen up in Minneapolis, we're looking like, clearly our policies don't allow this. And what's, I think, when you look at a show like Cops, and I think this is a good analogy I always like to talk about, is that you can see things that happen, it's like, we would never ever do that here. And again, it's because all these different departments are reflections of their different communities. The East Coast is definitely different than the West Coast and everything in between. I mean, there's just different mentalities about what people expect from their police or what the police do and get away with, based on policies, training, those kind of things.
Well,
so we adapt that. We look at those and we try to change to be responsive.
I know that you guys have such a difficult job, and it takes doing things that the general public maybe not understand. I didn't really get it until I started riding with police officers. I rode with one of our members that was a police officer in Austin. And I remember I would ride on the night shift, and see the sun go down. And this was probably 10, 12 years ago. And I was just amazed at, we'd pull up to 7-Eleven, and take a, break, and he'd get a drink. And he would know all the people that were walking into 7-Eleven. He knew the clerks, he knew the people shopping, he knew the homeless man he would talk to. And there's a lot of sides to the job that I think the news media doesn't capture. And then I would ride in San Marcos with Sam Meyer and on the night shift, and it just brought a whole new perspective. And I was really amazed at how well the public interacted with the police officers that were different races, and there was a mutual respect for one another that I didn't know. If you just watch the news, you'd think, well, it's not like this at all. But I want to get, before we close, I do want to talk about where we are as a culture, the heated stuff that's going on, that has been spurred on with the last 3 incidents of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, and all of the protests and riots that have happened since then. I want to know, I'd like to hear from you, Tom, on, and Jonnie too, on what may be concerning to you the most about where we are right now. And I don't, maybe we should just talk about this region, because that's really, for us, we're not going to fly out and do something in some other state or whatever. I mean, we think if we post something on Facebook or Instagram or something that we're really changing the world, but I think that the biggest impact we can have is right here. So maybe when you take the tension that's happening and what we're facing right here in this area, what are your thoughts on what are our biggest challenges?
I think there are several things that we have to get over. One, we have to get over the media blitz of this, and you kind of hinted on that. I think that racism has some selling points to it, and I think that sometimes is played up by our media. And this is just my personal opinion, and I'm not speaking for anyone or anything like that. But I think sometimes, these things are put in front of us. This is what I do know. We do still have a problem with race in our country.
Yeah.
I think everybody would agree with that. I think sometimes it is portrayed differently and for different reasons through the media, and that's very unfortunate. I think it's often politicized. That's unfortunate also. Here's what we do know. We've had a war about this, the Civil War. That didn't solve the problem. We've had riots and protests before. We can think of the LA riots, riots in Watts and things like that. That didn't solve the problem. We've had different political candidates come and go, and they've changed offices. That hadn't solved the problem. So it's not through any of those means that the problem is going to be solved. I think it's going to be solved with what we're doing here. I think it's solved from me. I have to come out of my comfort zone. My neighbor has to come out of his or her comfort zone. It's us getting to know each other and appreciate that there are differences. Cultures have differences, and that's okay. But it's about us talking to each other, really getting to know each other, so that we don't make assumptions because a person lives in one part of town or in a certain neighborhood that this is the case, and that, you know, that their kids are performing this way. It comes from us really getting to know people, and I think that that's what we lack in this region and as well in our country. We live in a cul-de-sac. I think there are 15, 16 kids in the cul-de-sac, you know, and it's very diverse. And I've often posted on Facebook when I'm out there watching my girls mix in with the other kids that this is what it's about.
Yeah.
You know, they're getting to know those kids, and our kids don't know about color and, you know, don't know the N-word and things like that, and other, you know, slang words as well, because we choose not to teach them those things. We want them to grow up just looking at people for who they are. And I think we've gotten so far away from that you know, there's an industry that has evolved from us being separated and segregated and so on and so forth. You know, I think that, you know, people use that to make money these days, and I think we're hurting because of that. As a country, the races, all of us are hurting because of those things that have been, you know, that have been done. I'm always hypervigilant when I hear a person say that they're a whatever, community activist, organizer, civil rights leader, and things like that, spokesperson, spokespeople, because nobody can speak for me and what I feel and what I need better than I can. And it's up to me to be able to articulate that, and it's up to me to be able to know what my neighbors need, or people on, you know, wherever it is that I may be. Not for somebody to tell me this is what they think or this is how they feel. I want to hear that. You know, myself. And I think that until we can look at it from that perspective of the change is going to come by each one of us taking steps toward other people that we may not normally socialize with or we may not know, we're not going to have change. And then, you know, since we are at church, I think it boils right down to it's a spiritual issue also. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, we can trace it back through the Bible. When we step away from God's will and purpose, then we know that that always leads to trouble. We've seen that time and time again. And I think that this is what we're seeing also. You know, when we say that we're founded on the principles of God, we got to follow those principles. It can't just be something that we say, but we've got to follow those principles that he's kind of outlined for us.
Ms. Jonnie?
I'm troubled because, this last incident really affected me. And I'm not going to sit up here and say it didn't.
Sure.
I missed 2 days of work because I was so troubled. And I think because it was publicized everywhere. I mean, I have to say that my colleagues at work, I didn't think that anybody would reach out to me, but they did. And all I said is that I'm not going to be at work, you know, although I'm doing on Zoom, you know, but I just couldn't do it.
I'm not going to log in today.
I'm just not logging in today. I'm unplugging, you know. I just couldn't do it because my heart was so heavy. Because this was a young man was from Houston, from Texas, that passed away. And I have, you know, because I'm a historian, I see that this is something that has been repetitive, that has happened over and over again. And we can say that, you know, whatever has happened, but it's been happening, it's been happening. I see that the young people who are protesting is different this time because it's a coalition of everyone who is concerned. You know, in the civil rights movement before, it was mostly black people. But if you notice, most of the coalition this time is everyone. And I see that the movement itself is changing, that everyone is concerned. And it's not just a few, but it's all over the world. There's protests all over the world. Of course, mind you, there's been some vandalism and other things that are going on, but the peaceful protest is everyone. So there's a change that is going on, that there is a concern, that we just can't just say, oh, we're just going to brush that under the rug and not deal with this and or whatever, that it's, you know, it's just those crazy kids. But there's something that's going on. And I always say, even though there's a lot of mess and it's messy and it's, you know, it's just, it looks bad, but it's always good that will come out of whatever. And I am so hopeful for America. I have a lot of hope and I have a lot of love. And so, and even though I was so hurt and my heart was heavy, my white colleagues called me, texted me, and that meant so much to me that people reached out to me.
Wow.
To see if I was okay. And in my department, I'm the only black person. And that meant a lot to me. And I just started in that job. You know, it hasn't even been a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just started a new job. And that shows that people are not looking at color. They're just looking at, that's a person who's hurting. So if we can have more of that that's happening, that, you know, we're not looking at color, we're just looking at there's somebody that's hurting and we want to love on that person.
Well, I was going to ask, what is that? What's the best way to express that? Just say, I'm here for you?
I'm here for you. And I just think that we just need to quit looking at who that is. If we see somebody who's hurting, just love on that person.
Yeah. It's great.
And all you have to say, I don't know how you're feeling, but just say, I love you. And we have a lot of people who are not privileged like we are. Are we loving on them? And I'm going to leave that alone.
I want to say, I didn't really tell y'all about my life, but I feel like I need to say this. That I grew up, you know, not too far from here, but I have family members that have never, to my knowledge, done anything to harm property or hurt people physically or do anything like that, but definitely have joked and said racist things and definitely used the N-word. And as a kid, I did myself, and went to a school that was almost all white. But thankfully, my parents took me to a church in Austin that was on the east side of town in Promised Land. And it was just like our church here, just mixed. And so I grew up with these two worlds. I was growing up with my family, and I'm not talking about my immediate family, I'm talking about extended family, reunions or whatever, and going around, there's this typical, you know, white, privileged, judgmental, racist, all the bad things you want to say about that. And I would have that influence, and then I would have church influence. And it was like, and at school too was tough. And so I'm so thankful, though, that I was immersed in church to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ and to be around people that were of color that I could become friends with and of course, coming to college here in San Marcos and being around the college environment was very helpful to me to be immersed in other cultures as well. And then had a heart for missions, so I would start going to other countries. And when I started going to other countries, started realizing how warped American mentality was, and how, we'd call it the World Series, but only the U.S. plays in it, And I would go to France, and they're like, "We've never watched baseball ever. We don't even know what the rules are." And I just began to see how warped and how twisted the American mentality was in so many ways. Having said that, I love this country. I think it's wonderful and amazing, but I've been dealing with these tensions, and made as I became an adult, really began to make the decision that I'm not going to be a racist. I want to know what inside of me is judgmental, what inside of me is subconsciously prejudging someone. Kind of like you're saying, there's so much of that that's going on that, and so I'm always trying to examine my heart. And there's some people in my life, I'm earlier on, like at church, and I wouldn't see their color at all. Like as far as like, I wouldn't notice it because it's my friend, and they're a different color, but it didn't matter. But then I would be in another environment, and I would see somebody that was different than me, different music, different clothing, talking a different way that I wasn't used to, and immediately there was something in me that was like, they're not like me, and it could be derogatory or whatever. So I'm saying all that to say, I want to be an advocate and an ally, and I want to be there for you guys. And Tom, if I ever say anything that you go, Pastor or Robin or whoever, that was not whatever, however you want to call it. I want you to tell me that, I want to hear that, because I want to be aware of it, and the same way, tell me, correct me. Let me know if I'm insensitive, if I'm saying something. I've emailed you before, before a sermon. I'm like, hey, I'm going to preach on this. What do you think about it? Tell me what you think. And you've said, well, I would change this or I would do that. And that's been very helpful to me. So the door's open there as well. Any final thoughts, Bob, Jonnie, Tom, that you've been thinking that you want to share before we close?
Yeah, it's kind of along the lines of what you said. Other people have asked me about this, what I think just overall, and I tell them, America is a great country. We got a lot of work ahead of us.
Yeah.
And until we can own up to that and say that, we will not get better. We are nowhere near what we could be. And I know people sometimes like, so it's the greatest country. It is. This is a great country. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else.
Absolutely.
And of course, we live in the greatest state in the union on top of that.
Yeah.
So, but we've got a lot of work
to
do. We really do. And I think it's a lot of individual work. It's a lot of work in our smaller communities, and that's how it has to be done, I think, just in my opinion. It starts individually, and then we grow it from there. That's the way that we can really change this, because I don't think any of us ever again wants to have to watch TV and see somebody's life taken from them.
Oh.
Nobody wants to go through that again. That, to me, we're really shielding our girls now because that's popping up all over the place.
Sure.
So we have to watch constantly so that they don't even get, a snippet of, what happened. We just don't want them to see, how cruel somebody can be to another human being. Because, they're at the point now where you can't kill a grasshopper. They just come apart at the seams, if you accidentally step on one. And we want them to keep that type of, that mentality. But yeah, we've just got a lot of work to do.
So we're just scratching the surface tonight, and as you're talking, I'm like having all these other questions about how how to deal with that, grapple with that, because there are times that we do need to have those conversations. So maybe we're going to have sequels to this. But
Yeah.
any other things you
Yeah,
want
I
to?
was just going to say that a lot of times we don't look at the institutions that make people to be caught in, to be marginalized. Because a lot of times there's a lot of people that are by the wayside that are not privileged, and that we need to look at, or that are there's the educational system, that there are people who are not getting the proper education, just like I was, just alluding to with my children. And if I had not known what to do, I
Okay.
don't think where they would be where they
I
are.
want you to. Okay, we're going to end, but I don't want to end yet. Okay, because you're bringing something up that I want. Because you kind of mentioned something earlier. Now you're mentioning it again. So we're going to drill down on it. When you say privileged, what do you mean by that?
I mean that there are some people in the United States that don't have access to education,
Yes.
that don't have access to food, insecurities.
Absolutely.
And they live in impoverished ways.
Oh yeah.
And so I think that and I say privilege, if you can have a job, and you may not have everything, but you have a job and you have the things that you need on a daily basis, there are still people out there who are homeless and
Yeah,
things like that.
yeah.
And so as long as there are people out there like that, we have work to do.
Yeah, like so we can sit up here and say, you're a school board, you're at Texas State, and look how good everything is. But there's a lot of reality
Right.
there. I mean, I was driving through Lockhart on that eastern side of the town, and this was just last year, and I was looking, we're looking for buildings. And I was really amazed at how poor some of those streets are in Lockhart. That it was almost like I was in a different country, and I was just shocked that that was that way. And so, man, I want as a church to be able to respond to that. So, Bob, any other thoughts you have?
Several of us who've been to a certain homicide school have a bumper sticker, and mine's in my office above my shoulder, so anybody sitting at my desk talking to me can see it. And it says, "Remember, we work for God." And that leadership has to push down from the top through an agency, and we're committed to that. And my profession's taking a lot of hits, and rightfully so. There's been some things that hurt a lot of us to our core, different than it's hurt other people, but there's some changes that need to be made. We're committed here in San Marcos to that, and I think agencies all over the place are hearing that too. Tammy was reading me on the way up here that George Floyd's 6-year-old daughter said something today that her daddy has changed the world, and I'm hoping that that's so true. And I see that. I see those changes happening. They can't come fast enough.
Yeah.
And but we work for God.
Well, you would think we got two pastors up here. We'd be talking about Jesus more. I don't want to close tonight without addressing that Jesus himself is the ultimate purveyor of love that you're talking about, Jonnie, and he was constantly hard on the establishment. I mean, if he was hard on anybody, it was the establishment, and he was the most gentle and loving to those that were not privileged, And so as Christians and as believers, I want to challenge everybody that's with us during this discussion to find people in your life that you can call and check on, and call and say, "I'm with you," and call and say, "I don't know what to say. I don't have the answers. I don't know what to do, but I just want you to know I'm here for you." And that's better. I think calling is so much better than posting something because it's so much personal. But Erica, my wife, is so much more caring and compassionate than I am. she has such a heart for the lost and heart for other people. She came home from the grocery store on I think it was Friday night or Saturday night in the heat of all this stuff, and she's like, I just had the most amazing conversation in the cereal aisle with a guy. And I was like, what? And she said, yeah, this black man in the grocery store started talking about cereal. And he's like, man, have you tried this Raisin Crunch, whatever? And she was like, no. So they started talking about cereal. And I said, well, y'all talked for 40 minutes. She said, we had the greatest conversation. And she said, we did not one time talk about everything that's going on. They talked about midwifery, and they talked about his profession. They talked about being a pastor's wife, and they just had this great conversation in the grocery store. And so I believe that we can change the world one person at a time, one conversation at a time. And you may not think that you have the ability to change and fix all of these things, and that's not what God's calling us to do. He's calling us to love our neighbor as ourselves. And that means somebody that lives next to you. That means the neighborhood next to you. That means people in our city, our county, loving on them, asking about them, reaching out to them, and holding your tongue sometimes and just listening, and just saying, I don't understand what you're going through, but I want to. And I'm going to just say that it would break my heart to think that you guys or anybody in our church thought for a second that we weren't with you, or that your life, your journey, or your path is something that we're going to disregard or think that it's no big deal. So let's pray right now. I want y'all to join with us wherever you are. Heavenly Father, we are praying that your light would begin to glow in each of us. God, that darkness can't drive out darkness, but Lord, you can. You are the light. We pray, God, that your light would begin to shine through us. God, we pray for everyone that's hurting right now, everyone that is confused, everyone that is filled with fear. God, we know that you are a God that is the perfect antidote to fear. You are the answer. You are the solution. We pray, God, that not through our preaching, not through our, posts online or whatever, but Lord, through our attention, through our presence, through our sacrifice and submission and humility, that we would begin to build some bridges in this area and make a difference, God. That the next generation would be able to stand on a foundation of our shoulders and move forward in love and peace. And we know that someday you're going to bring perfect reconciliation to this world, and there's going to be no more tears. Until that time comes, God, may we bring pictures of that everywhere we go. May we be a picture of what heaven's going to be like wherever we go. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Good night. Goodbye to everybody that's online. We love you so much. We'll see you on Sunday, here or online again.